Excellent. So we are live right now on LinkedIn, and we're really proud to have Eugene Yeo with us. Thanks, Eugene, for coming. And it would be great to hear from you and listen to your experience. You've had a very impressive professional journey, and up until a few years ago, you were CIO, CEO of MyRepublic, which is a very successful enterprise, and you helped them grow from a $5 million revenue company into a $150 million company. You do digital transformation right now with a lot of companies. You're interested in blockchain, you're interested in cloud, and you know, we hear your name everywhere nowadays. So really, thanks for giving us the time to get to know you better and share your experience with our audience. So if there are any questions, then we'll address them, because sometimes people putting questions don't, you know, feel shy and ask questions, and we'll address them to Eugene. So Eugene, thank you again. And tell us a little bit about your professional journey. How did you get interested in what you were doing, and how did it lead to MyRepublic days and later on to digital transformation? Eugene, I think I can't hear you. I think there's
Can you hear me?
Yes, you have to restart again. Yes.
Okay, no worries.
Okay.
So first of all, thanks so much for inviting me for this Spark session this morning. It's a pleasure to be able to have this short chat with you on what's going on in terms of the technology space and a bit about myself. So very happy to be here to share with everyone.
Excellent.
So first of all, to answer your question, my professional journey is one that's a bit intriguing, really, because there's two aspects to my journey. A core of my journey is really technology, and I'm very passionate about technology, whether it's cloud technology, whether it's even networking or even blockchain. So I'm fascinated by all forms of technology, and I always love to read up and understand and even practice some of these technology stacks if possible. I've been doing it for close to 2 decades or more. And on the other side, for the last decade or so, I've been involved with a company called MyRepublic. I joined them at the very beginning when they started in Singapore in 2011. And I had the pleasure of growing with them across Asia Pacific and seeing that amazing growth in terms of customer numbers, as well as in terms of the platform that we built together, which is pretty amazing because in 2011, no one really embraced the cloud. And, we took a leap of faith. We embraced it wholeheartedly. We even invested in building a cloud native stack. And again, this is 2011. This is more than a decade ago, right? So it took guts, but I'm very happy. I'm sure MyRepublic's very happy where it is today. So of course, right now I've left MyRepublic and I'm doing a lot of digital transformation programs for various companies, giving executive training masterclasses, and also being very involved in the blockchain space.
Wonderful. Well, this 10 years ago, you took a bet. Basically, you said that you decided to go on cloud when cloud was almost the name of clouds. No, but it didn't have any connotation with internet or that it wasn't the household name. Nowadays, everybody knows about what cloud is. But how was that bet? Tell us a little bit about it. I mean, how do companies take bets, and how do they make sure that it actually is the right thing to do?
Understood. It's a very good question, right? And one of the factors you need to understand is in 2011, when MyRepublic started, we didn't have the large budgets to build huge data centers, right? And we didn't have the budgets to actually size it up, which is a very expensive process. That's one thing. The other thing is we wanted to be much more nimble than the big players. We were competing against giants at that time. So adopting cloud was almost a natural process for us. Of course, there were a lot of challenges. Cloud was still very nascent at that time. People didn't really understand it. But through working together with our partners, we managed to establish something that was strong, solid, and worked, and definitely scaled for us.
Because this is usually an interesting angle. Now, when you're doing startups or you're starting a new venture, it's that you sometimes hear people saying, "Oh, you're either too early launching this technology, or be careful about it. Don't push it too much. Well, the crowd, the rest of the sector is doing this. You should maybe not be doing what you're doing." That intuitive sense of taking the bet and then focusing on it. Were there any doubts at the time? How was management dealing with it in terms of, or are we doing the right thing? Are we going in the right direction? How do you ensure that happens?
Yeah, I understood on that. And of course, there's always a lot of technology hype. And whenever there's hype, it's a draw for executives to try to move towards those hype, right? And try to get involved in those hype. But fundamentally, you need to understand what's the value that technology brings to you, to your organization. And if you understand that fundamental value and you understand that it does add a long-term competitive advantage to your organization, or it's something that's here to stay like blockchain, right? So it's always important to have a better understanding, build better competencies in-house, right? Even at an earlier stage. I think some of these factors weigh very importantly, right? So take away the hype, start to look at business value, start to look at the longer term landscape of what's going on, and whether this particular technology would play a big competitive advantage to your organization, right? So of course, when we went into cloud in 2011, there were some fears, there's a bit of risk as well, particularly on latency, because we are running on public assets, right? And for a telecommunications company, typically we want to have everything close to our data center, right? But we managed to, overcome some of these challenges over time, of course, right? Through a nimble, agile way, I would say, right? And eventually built this strong pillar that the organization is leveraging to today.
And is there, for example, in all of this, a big component regarding how the sort of the world evolved in the meantime? In 10 years, you've seen that people started going on cloud. They preferred to actually use technology that's much more nimble. Over time, how did the world change, and how did you keep up with it? And this will lead us to sort of a little bit of reflection on the blockchain and how it might actually changing the world right now. But from 2011 up until 2019, what were the things that you saw that was completely different from what you have seen before?
Yeah, I mean, in 2011, cloud was fairly new, but come 2014, 2015, people started to see the value of cloud and started, migrating some of their existing workloads onto the cloud. But then you started to see another shift because there's so much innovation that's happening in the public cloud domain. Companies started embracing this concept called multi-cloud, right? So where they would leverage more than one cloud provider. In addition, for a lot of companies who have existing infrastructure, it made sense for them to do another concept called hybrid cloud, where you would integrate your private data center with public cloud assets and manage all those resource pools as one. Of course, there was another big trend that happened along that period, and the trend was in the space of containerization. So it's a technical term. I wouldn't go too much into it, but containerization allowed us to basically move workloads fairly quickly across different cloud infrastructure. And that was a key component of the paradigm shift, I would say, in cloud. So fast forward to today, of course, the bet was right. People are moving into hybrid cloud, into multi-cloud, and figuring out how to build cloud native application stacks, right, in their ecosystem. And of course, at MyRepublic, we've already done this since 2011. So we built a lot of internal competencies that helped us to today.
Wonderful. But we're coming to the recent times, and now, right now, you're basically, working with a lot of companies on their digital transformation journey. You actually, have also engagements such as the CIO Academy Asia, the TM Forum. So you tend to sort of see a number of different companies and contexts. What's the biggest challenge right now that you see on the digital transformation front? And it could be different for different sectors. So give us a few examples. But what's keeping people awake right now?
I think, post-COVID, one of the biggest challenges we see in organizations, and I think this is the same across every industry that I spoke to, the biggest challenge is talent, right? You've got this whole exodus of people realizing that they wanted a better work-life balance, people starting to resign, change jobs, a lesser talent pool available in the market, right? A lot of talented individuals are starting their own companies or finding alternative work forms. So that's actually a very big challenge for the technology space, right? For any companies, right? So the question then is, how do you overcome those challenges? And one of the ways that you can overcome those challenges is to drive better efficiencies in terms of manpower utilization. And that's where technology plays a part. How can you push automation across your organization so that you reduce the number of manpower you need to hire or find? Or other areas that you should be looking at is, for example, in terms of your architecture stack, right? How are you architecting certain elements in your organization to make it easier to manage?
And do you see this as a trend across the border in different sectors, or is it particularly focused on certain sectors that you work with? Is the talent, so-called the talent scarcity, is that guiding a lot of the decisions that companies are making on digital transformation front?
Yeah, absolutely, right? And the biggest challenge I would say today is in the technology space. Because of COVID, digital transformation took a fast lane, I would say, right? And there was a huge demand for tech talents. And therefore, it becomes much more challenging for organizations today to find talents. And the search for talents are now global because a lot of tech folks can actually work remotely, right? So you won't just be looking in Singapore for talents, you'll be looking across the world trying to find and fill your talent gap. So everyone's doing the same across the world as well. And that becomes very challenging.
And in, for example, Singapore, having a very limited pool of people. I mean, it's full of talents, but it's still a 5.5 million city state, and it does have a lot of challenges. But when Singapore companies grow, and quite a few companies grow, what's the natural source of talent for them? Is it global? Is it Southeast Asia? Do people do remotely nowadays? Do they look for talents in the Philippines, elsewhere? How is it so different?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you can't find the talent within Singapore, you start to look elsewhere, right? You start to look nearby. For example, in Malaysia and Indonesia, Philippines, you start to look into these neighboring countries where there's probably a larger talent pool size, and then attract them to join your organization, right? But the balance has to be found, right? And there are talents in Singapore, and the question then is, how do you leverage those talents to maximize their value, right? Perhaps these talents should be working on higher value elements, and then you can offshore some of the more, routine work out to the neighboring countries or to offshore teams.
And this, I presume, also applies to the blockchain world. I mean, we're seeing a huge transformation there. What is the part of blockchain that you're interested in for your work, in the sense that as the blockchain's contribution to digital transformation, the infrastructure part and its potential? What is one thing, or a couple of items within the blockchain world that you feel, yes, I need to master this and then pass it on to my clients?
Yeah, understood. I think most importantly, blockchain is pretty misunderstood. I think that's still one of the big challenges. It's a fairly new technology, a lot of nascent concepts, and people grapple with the understanding of how it can be applied to the organization, what's its real benefits versus its disadvantages, especially what's the use cases, right? And how do you get started? I think these are all the challenges and the thoughts that's going on in executives' minds, right? As they look at blockchain as technology, they feel and they understand that it's likely something that's here to stay. It's valuable, right? There's some form of organizational value as well. But the question is how to get started.
So starting is the most difficult part. But when you look at, for example, I'm very interested at the sort of the difference between the older generation of managers and the younger generation of managers in more established companies. It's not very easy to master all of this and be almost bold about going into blockchain. How do established companies tackle the sort of the blockchain space, because they may have a number of staff that may not be as knowledgeable as the youngsters who were born maybe with the blockchain revolution?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And like every new technology, I think it's very important for leadership to understand it, right? So the first recommendation from me would be for the leaders in the organization to attend, perhaps master classes, perhaps training sessions, to understand what blockchain is all about, to understand what some companies are doing with blockchain, how are they implementing in their organization. These are things that are very important, right? So get some foundational understanding and knowledge of the technology. Once that happens, then ideas will spark, right? And once you have these ideas, you can perhaps engage with a vendor, even hire a small team to get started on this journey, right? So first of all is education. If you don't understand something, then you can't get started, right?
Yes, well, it's also one thing that I've seen basically within the blockchain world, that it has its own language, it has its own way of tackling anything around this new technology. It has a very community spirit. It's almost like a sense of sometimes cult, and breaking into that circle is also very difficult. So it can be rather intimidating. I mean, I'm just imagining myself of a company where I'm the CEO, and then a company with a sort of legacy tradition, and then all of a sudden, I bump into these guys who completely speak a different language about blockchain. I mean, that lack of communication. I mean, you're a consultant, so part of your job probably is also translating that into management and trying to make them understand the work. What was the biggest challenge there?
I mean, again, right, it's about how do you actually get started? And, if you look at companies, there are a lot of big organizations that are already jumping into blockchain, right? I mean, Coca-Cola recently auctioned these things called loot boxes, right, of NFTs. And inside these loot boxes were basically digital apparel of Coca-Cola, right? And then these can be used on the metaverse platform, can be displayed in the metaverse platform like Decentraland. So that's one of the ways that they're getting involved. I would say it's more gamification, memorabilia kind of strategy. Other companies are getting involved in terms of like Samsung. They actually set up a digital store in Decentraland as well, right? So a lot of companies, again, metaverse is very visual. It's pretty easy to grasp the concept. You go in there, you either rent or buy a land parcel, start to build a store and start to engage the community within. So that could be one of the easy ways of getting involved, right? So it doesn't have to be that technical. It doesn't have to be that difficult. And of course, each of these blockchain protocols and ecosystems have their own community, but this community is really about the evolution of a particular platform or protocol, right? And most of the times when you are running an organization, the question then is, what value can that particular protocol or blockchain bring to you?
And from your perspective, is the blockchain revolution here to stay, or is it a fad? Because as you know, a lot of it is associated to cryptocurrencies and all that, whereas people always forget that actual blockchain is the sort of underlying infrastructure. And then no matter whatever cryptocurrency there's around, which creates a lot of buzz, the underlying technology or underlying protocol or underlying approach is fairly robust and tested, and we know that it will lead to certain things. But is this something, that tension, is it going to make it or break it? I mean, do you think blockchain is somewhere, is going to live up to its potential and promises?
Well, it's a very good question. And I mean, my perspective is that blockchain is here to stay, right? The question should be in what form, right? And in what cases and use cases, and how is society and the world going to accept and adopt blockchain? Of course, over the last, close to a decade, right, you've got several things that happen in the blockchain. If you talk about blockchain, people think of Bitcoin, right? The challenge with Bitcoin is that it doesn't really have any fundamental utility, right? It's just an exchange of a digital token, and people, well, demand and supply, economics decides the price value, right, of that particular token, right? So there's huge volatility and price swings. But then you start to look at what's going on. For example, there's this concept called stable coins. Not really a concept, but it's already there, right? So there are stable coins in the market. A stable coin could be pegged to a US dollar. And these stable coins actually provide a lifeline in countries with hyperinflation, right? For example, in Argentina, up to 20% of your salary could actually be paid via stable coins or cryptocurrencies. And if you understand the Argentinian peso, right, within a year, you could have price swings of 50% of the value of the Argentinian peso. So by having a stable coin pegged to a stable dollar, that really helps perhaps even save livelihoods, right? Because they don't see the huge devaluation of the money that they make through work.
So you do see actually a great potential to do good in the sense that the blockchain has this potential to not only transform companies, but also in a way improve the livelihood of people by almost stabilizing all these ups and downs in currencies and all that.
Yeah, but it's not just that. I'll give you another example, right, of how NFTs, right? I mean, it's all the hype. Of course, in recent months, NFTs have taken a slight dip in terms of transaction volume. But NFTs can actually provide better protection and rewards for artists, particularly from developing countries, right? Where these artists, if they get famous, they don't get a fee when their art's being resold, right? But in NFTs, you can actually codify a fee, let's say 10% every time the particular art is being resold. So these budding artists from these countries could actually continue to earn value from the work pieces that they build, and therefore encourage them to do even better. So there are many ways of how blockchain can actually come into play, but you just need to sift through the hype.
Yes. That's usually the toughest part for small investors or people who are actually not very knowledgeable about the uses and the risks involved, and it looks like we're going to need a lot of blockchain literacy, almost like financial literacy programs. We will need that. And I was just looking at the recent masterclass that you did at the CIO Academy Asia, and the title was Blockchain and Digital Trust. It's the digital trust part interests me a lot. What do you mean exactly by, and what's the connection between trust and blockchain?
Yeah, so one of the important values that blockchain brings is the fact that its data is immutable. Immutable means that you can't really change the data in the past unless you're able to influence all the, I would say validator nodes or the mining rigs, right? So there's ways to rebuild or hack the chain. But fundamentally, blockchain is immutable. Blocks in the past, the data stored within those blocks cannot be changed. And that allows us to leverage on blockchain as a way to create digital trust, right? Digital trust in terms of trusting perhaps, the audit trail that's happening in your organization, right? If you hash the data, the hash key in, a public blockchain like Ethereum, you could actually cross-reference and see whether that data has been tampered with. Of course, traditionally, it's pretty easy to tamper the data internally as long as you have access to the databases. So there's just one simple way of how blockchain can really create trust within the organization and with the data in the organization. Of course, blockchain is also being leveraged heavily today to create trust between parties, right? Because you've got this whole concept of smart contracts where you can codify business rules. A business rule could be as simple as, if you pay me $10, I'll give you a cookie, right? So that could be a very simple business logic. And as long as you pay me the $10, the blockchain will execute it and, perhaps issue out a cookie to you. So it removes the need to worry too much about, who the other counterparty is, and codifies everything into a chain. So you can imagine that the trade industry is leveraging heavily on blockchain to try to build this digital trust.
Now, this is a very interesting concept. I mean, the fact that we can actually contractualize a lot of these transactions, and actually, you know, for the last 15 years, we as users, we've been helping the growth of the big tech world, the Googles and the Facebooks and all that, by giving them constant data about ourselves and our lives and our points of view, and those data are actually being utilized by quite a lot of companies to grow. And I'm just wondering if blockchain is going to be a remedy for that, where that I get actually in one way or another retributed and paid for this type of data that's being collected.
It sounds like you understand Web3 pretty well for this question. So you're exactly right and spot on, right? There's this whole movement to Web 3.0. So we need to understand what Web 3.0 is. So I'll give you a quick, maybe brief on that. So Web 2.0 is where we are living today. And in Web 2.0, centralized companies own a lot of the internet platforms. For example, social media platforms, your search engines, they're owned by organizations. The challenge with that is that you don't really know what these organizations do with your data. These organizations are profit-driven, so they want to, maximize the value they can extract out of you or mine out of you. So, there's this constant fear. In addition, you don't really gain the value or share with the value when you are using these platforms, right? So there's this whole move to Web 3.0, where instead of having centralized organizations run these platforms, you have decentralized open source systems. So because it's decentralized, you can actually know that there's no one person trying to influence perhaps the use of private data, right, that you provide. The other aspect is the fact that it's open source, means that you can analyze the code, you can read the code, and you can understand whether there's anything that's happening that you don't want to happen, right? So these two are very important elements to look at. But the move towards Web3 is coming. I'll give you an example of that. Instead of using Chrome, right, which a lot of people will probably be using today, the challenge with using Chrome is that you don't really get to share in the value, right? As you browse, you are shown advertising. Yeah, exactly. You browse the internet, you're shown advertising. It could be relevant to you. The company's making money, you're not sharing in that value. So there's this new browser called the Brave browser, right? And one of the great things about the Brave browser is that it rewards you for browsing the internet. So it's not a lot, but I typically get about $10 US a month through my typical browsing patterns. And that's not bad, right? The other thing about Brave browser is that it's open source. So you can actually see what's going behind the scenes and ensure that the data is not being collected and sold off to some third party, right? So these are very important aspects of Web 3.0 that helps to alleviate the worry of privacy, particularly in Web 2.0 ecosystems.
Wonderful, Eugene. We have a couple of minutes left, so I just wanted to ask you the last question, which is basically, I read it on your LinkedIn profile, that you're really interested in ethical hacking. Tell us, ethics and hacking usually do not go hand in hand. What do you mean exactly?
Right, so ethical hacking is a term that basically it's used when we hack for good. When I say hack for good, it means that I'm hacking perhaps an organization's systems to understand its vulnerabilities and therefore allow them to patch it so that, real hackers don't leverage on that as a potential attack vector. So that's really the whole concept of ethical hacking. Hacking to improve the system's security, prevent data leakage from happening.
Wonderful. If basically, if we can use hacking to actually understand cybersecurity and understand if we have robust systems and companies, probably in the next few years, you're going to see people with their business cards written ethical hacker as the work that they do. So we're going to see a lot of new roles and responsibilities and titles coming into play. Listen, this has been a really, really great conversation. You have so much knowledge of this, the last 10 years, how technology evolved. You've been sort of in the forefront of a lot of new things happening. Is there any message that you would like to give in terms of entrepreneurs getting into the space? What should they do to be much more attuned with the digital transformation?
I think the message I'll leave people with is, whenever there's new technology, try to understand it, right? Don't just try to listen to hype or what people are saying. Take a bit of time, understand the technology, and then once you understand it, you can understand how it can help you in your organization. And that's a very important point. And even though you may be the CEO of the company and you're not the tech leader, it's also important for the other business executives to understand the technology as well. Because if they don't understand it, then you won't get buy-in across your organization.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Eugene, and best of luck, and hope to catch up with you some other time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sadak. Pleasure speaking with you.
Okay, excellent. I just interrupted. Thank you so much. Listen, this has been great. I hope it wasn't too painful.
It's great. I love having chats. Yeah, it's a great session to have these informal chats rather than a structured course or class.
Yeah. It's just a conversation, and it's nice flow and no formalities, and it's I think I like it. Half an hour, and that's why we call it the spark session.
It's to spark ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Wonderful. Listen, best of luck, and hope to catch up with you. Hopefully,
definitely.
Maybe we'll repeat this conversation in 6 to 9 months and see how things are developing.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sadak. Have a great week ahead.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.